Hello everyone, welcome to Crankcast. This is episode 3 of the second season. And today we have a fairly interesting episode, I have to say. I'm your host, Tudor, and also make sure to check out our big main channel, that's Crank It. If you like motorcycle movies, then yeah, that's the way to go. But getting into this week's topics, we have a few. So in the news section, we actually have 7 bits of news. That's quite a lot. First of all, we have the Dakar Rally, which is finally over, and we have our winners, we have the podium. We can finally properly talk about it. 2 news from Aprilia. We have basically information about the new Tuono V4 and about the new RSV4. We're going to go a bit deeper into those a tiny bit later. Next up is Kawasaki axes the ZX6R and the H2 because of Euro 5. KTM news. We have a new updated Duke 890. Spoiler alert, it's not that big of an update, but spoiler alert, it's not bad. Not at all. And then the final 2 are Harley Davidson introduces the new and updated Street Bob 114. And finally, a brand you might not have heard of called CFMoto. They released their MT800 bike. They're a Chinese company that are delivering some promising things. We're definitely going to talk about that. And then for the storytelling section of this podcast, we're going to talk about Italy. To be more specific, about the Ducati Monster. How it came to be, what it represented, and what it still represents for Ducati. And we'll just see why the Monster is just such an important bike. I would argue even worldwide. But yeah, that's a bit towards the end. Because in the beginning, we have to talk about the news. And this is the last time we're going to mention Dakar in this season. But we have the final results. And the final results are like this. Honda in the first 2 places. So Honda just did a double at this year's Dakar, with KTM coming in 3rd place. So we have to give a huge round of applause to Kevin Benavides and Ricky Brabec. These are the first 2 Honda riders that took the podium, the overall podium. They did an amazing race. What can I say? They're really good riders in a good environment with a good bike. Honda has really been focusing on the Dakar, especially in the last 2 years, since, well, it basically won. And yeah, it's got exciting. Unfortunately, Toby Price wasn't part of the race any longer. He had to abandon it. But that being said, in 3rd place was a KTM factory rider. You might have heard about him, the Aussie Sam Sunderland. Wait, is he Australian? I am not 100% sure now that I said it. Whatever, it's Sam Sunderland in 3rd place. A really consistent ride. He was close. To be fair, they were all pretty close. So this is the second time KTM didn't get the win, because KTM had a huge win streak. I think it was a 17 or 15-year win streak in Dakar. That's huge. That's the type of performance that only a few manufacturers, like Mitsubishi, did that in the car scene on the Dakar. They won, I think, 10 consecutive years. But that being said, last year Honda won. So now Honda won again. And what they proved with this is that they're not just a seasonal bike. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't something that, it happened once. No. Honda is competitive and it's here to win the Dakar, and that's exciting, honestly. I might not be the biggest Honda fan out there as a brand, but hey, when you have a cool racing program and you have good stuff, why not? We have interesting racing. That's what we all want. Now, one thing that's important to mention is actually that the differences between these riders were fairly small. So the difference between Kevin Benavides and Ricky Brabec, which are the 2 Honda riders in places 1 and 2, was 5 minutes. And then to the 1st place was 16 minutes. So the biggest difference, right, between the 3rd place, Sam Sunderland, and the 1st Honda rider was actually just 16 minutes, which, let me tell you something, 16 minutes is not much. It's really not a lot of time for a race like the Dakar Rally. But yeah, this is the Dakar news, and now it's time to go into things that are slightly more attainable for us mere mortals. And we're gonna have to talk about Aprilia, which they continued the roll with the new announcement. So we had previously the Tuono 660, we had the Touareg 660 that was seen in spy shots. We had the RS660, but now we have the big and bad boys. Now it's their flagship time. So let's start with the first one, and we have a new Tuono V4 and V4 factory for 2021. And it comes with a few changes to the old model. So first things first, that's gonna strike you when you first see it, is the design. It's heavily inspired from the RS and the Tuono 660. So Aprilia created this new design language of these smaller CC bikes, and they're definitely applying it to this. Honestly, if you look at them like quickly through pictures, you're not going to be able to tell much difference between the Tuono and between the Tuono 660 and the 1100. That being said, I don't think it's bad. I'm not the biggest fan of the design. It's not the boldest or the sexiest. But that being said, it's not ugly. It's not ugly at all. It's a perfectly acceptable design. It's actually decent. I like it. The color combinations are okay. But yeah, this is the styling department. Another thing with the styling department is now this bike has wings. Now you might have seen these sort of winglets in MotoGP. That's where they first started, when they first implemented. The theory behind them is that they should provide more downforce on the front end. And that downforce should actually translate to the back end as well. So it should be more stable under braking, under acceleration, should wheelie less, in theory. And Ducati first introduced this winglets idea on a naked bike, on their Street Fighter. But now Aprilia is taking the same Italian route, and we're going to have winglets on the new Tuono 1100. Honestly, I think they look pretty darn nice. They look aggressive, and I like them. Now, the bike itself should also be more comfortable. Aprilia says they modified the tank and the rear sections, and now you should be sitting a bit more sort of inside the bike. And you should have a more relaxed riding position. Now, that's actually great, because the Tuono was one of those bikes that was basically an RSV with some stripped fairings. That's good for a lot of things, but it's not as good for riding position and for it being a proper naked. But with this change, the position should be a bit more upright. Now, we're going to see how noticeable this change actually is when the first reviews appear. But it's exciting. Now, engine-wise, it's basically the same engine. So you're still going to have 173 horsepower in a V4 configuration. That's actually not bad. The old V4 was a great engine, and especially in the sound department, it was absolutely amazing. But yeah, so they kept the same engine. Basically, they just updated it in order to be Euro 5 compliant. Horsepower-wise, it's up there. I mean, sure, it's not 200 horsepower like the Street Fighter. Do you need that in a naked? I would argue not. And their V4 was one of the smoothest, best sounding, and one of the best performing bikes out there. So the fact that they didn't change the engine, honestly, I'm not disappointed. Their old engine was perfectly fine. But now it's going to pass Euro 5, basically. So you still have a proper amount of power. But as a conclusion to this, the changes aren't really radical. Sure, we have a new design. We have some slightly updated components, like the electronics, for example. So we do have updates in 2021 model year, but they aren't great. Like, yes, we do have, for example, a lighter aluminium swing arm, but the changes aren't drastic. And I would argue that's not necessarily bad, because the old Tuono V4 and V4 Factory were amazing bikes. They performed amazingly, they rode amazingly. There's a lot of good stuff to say about the old Tuonos. And hey, it was Bike of the Year in a lot of magazines' tests in the previous years. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how is this model going to perform. If I'm gonna bet, it's gonna be a brilliant bike, just as the other Tuonos used to be. But I guess yeah, we'll have to wait and see for that. Sticking to Aprilia, because they consider launching just the Tuono wouldn't be enough, we also have the new RSV4 for 2021. Again, I'm not going to sit too much around here, but it's basically the same engine as the old bike, a 214 horsepower bike that has been updated in order for it to comply with the new Euro 5 regulation. It's good that basically the capacity stayed basically the same amount of power. I mean, I don't know about you, but 214 horsepower, it's plenty. Again, the same beautiful soundtrack like in the case of the Tuono. We have a new exhaust that should provide more torque. Now, how relevant is this? I would say not much, because let's be fair, when you're spending that sort of money on a bike, like, I don't know, I think it's 17 or 18,000 euros, something like that, Prices, I don't think they changed, but when you're spending that sort of money for a bike, you're probably going to get an aftermarket exhaust, homologated and stuff, but at least an Acura slip-on or a full exhaust system. When you spend that much money on a bike, it's a shame not to go a bit towards the extra mile than to buy a new, basically full, proper system. But hey, it's nice that it's a better one from factory. I honestly cannot complain. Now, this bike's coming really interesting because currently, the kings of the superbike world were the Ducati Panigale V4 S, and then, you have the art version, but it's something a bit different. But you have the V4S, and then you also have the new BMW S1000RR, which came in 2019 or 2020. I'm not sure. But basically the latest S1000RR. And up until now, the Panigale stayed a sort of exotic Ducati bike. Maybe not the fastest on track, but it's such an exotic bike and gives you an amazing feeling. When you look at it, it's beautiful. And the BMW has been clinical, right? The styling, it's nice, but it's nowhere near the Ducati. It's not as aggressive, doesn't look as bold. It's a bit of a reserved bike, but when you spank it on track, it definitely performs. So it doesn't lack in the performance department. It's one of the fastest bikes out there. What I hope this RSV4 is going to do is going to come somewhere in between. Design-wise, it's not quite Panigale level, but it's honestly not bad. So I think design-wise, they're good. Performance-wise, they should be really good. So I think they're nice in between, right? When you want a bit of exotica, but also something a bit more normal, I guess. Aprilia isn't that normal, but either way, I'm really excited to see this. I'm excited to see how it compares to the V4S and to the new S1000RR, but we have to wait and see for that one. Again, same with the Tuono, we have a new lighter aluminum swing arm. So there's that. So this is all on the standard version, but we also have the factory version, which gets a few nice updates. So in this case, it gets forged aluminium. My God. Factory gets forged aluminium wheels, semi-active Öhlins Smart EC2 suspension, and the new Brembo Stilema calipers. So they're a bit of an upgrade over the standard model. That's not to say the standard model is going to brake like shit. I definitely don't think so. But hey, a bit more braking power didn't hurt anyone, did it? And yeah, design-wise, basically it's an RS660. A bit more aggressive, of course, but the overall design language is the same from the newly launched RS660. I'm glad that Aprilia finally updated their designs. I honestly think they could go a bit bolder. I think they could go a bit more. But that being said, it's not a bad design, right? It's actually a fairly good design that I'm excited to see out there on the streets. Because in pictures, it might look a bit flat, as a lot of these bikes do, but in real life, I think it's going to look much better than in pictures. So yeah, I'm excited to see this. And this is the end with Aprilia news for this round of Crankcast. Now it's time to go to Japan, and Kawasaki axes their ZX6R and Ninja H2. Basically, Euro 5 just killed these bikes. Because of the emissions regulations that these bikes have to comply to, Kawasaki is no longer able to sell the H2 as it is and the ZX6R, and so they decided to just kill them. At least in Europe. I'm not exactly sure if they're killing them in other markets as well. But the point is, a lot of people will not be getting these bikes. Now, to be fair, the ZX6R I kind of expected, because this whole 600cc range hasn't really been updated in a long time. You could argue that Yamaha tried to revitalize it with their new form R6, but at the end of the day, it was still sort of like an old R6, right? Same levels of power, same sort of controls. Yes, nicer fairings, but yeah, not much. So I think the segment has been slowly dying. And I honestly, if they were to add something to the ZX6R, yeah, I get it. Less people are buying these 600cc super sports either way. But what I'm a bit more surprised about is the Kawasaki H2, because that's a fairly new and that's like their flagship bike, right? If you want to go, okay, what's their halo bike? In Kawasaki, it's the H2. So the fact that we don't have this H2 any longer, it's a bit disappointing, honestly. I think Kawasaki could have done something to make it Euro 5 compliant. But at the same time, I probably kind of get it. Like, from a business perspective, these sort of halo bikes like the H2 don't really sell that well. They sell well, don't get me wrong. But when compared to other bikes, yeah, I see why the H2 is not a priority any longer. So, fine. That makes sense. A good thing that may come out of this is that you might be able to find in the year to come a lot of leftover stock of these bikes. So the bikes that are already on the showroom floors, the ZX6Rs and the H2s, you're probably still going to be able to find them on dealers, and you might actually have a pretty good discount. So just because they're not going to build these bikes any longer doesn't mean they're bad bikes. Oh no. They're really good bikes, both of them. So yeah, watch out for deals at your local dealership around you. And one thing I actually mentioned in my notes here is that with these two Supersports bikes killed, Kawasaki's Supersport offerings are fairly thin. They still have their ZX10R, which, fine, flagship leader bike. They don't have the Halo bike, which is the H2, and they don't have their 600 any longer. So, will they come with something else? Maybe a different sort of engine configuration, maybe something in the 800cc range? I honestly don't know. I do not know, but it will be interesting to find out what Kawasaki's plans are for the future. But for now, unfortunately, these bikes are not gonna be able to be acquired by customers. That's a pity. Okay, yeah, I had to have a bit of a drink there, but sponsored by San Pellegrino. No, it isn't, but if you want to sponsor this podcast, please let me know. But we move back to Europe with news about KTM, and they basically announced their new Duke 890. Now, KTM initially launched the Duke 790 and their Adventure 790. Now, in the meantime, they did update the Adventure to their new 890 platform. But the Duke sort of was a bit left out. The Duke never got the new 890 platform until now. So basically it has the same revised engine as the 890 Adventure. Of course, the tuning is a bit different because the tuning of an engine that needs to go into an adventure bike is slightly different than the tuning of a bike that's street oriented and with sporty credentials. But yeah, the base engine is the same, 890 finally in the new Adventure and Adventure R. It has 8 more horsepower, which is actually substantial for bikes that are usually a bit like in the 100 horsepower range plus minus. 8 horsepower is nothing to laugh about. It's actually a fair good increase in power. And KTM claims that they smoothened out the throttle response, so that should be even smoother. I guess. I mean, until we're gonna be able to ride it, we'll never know. But of course, this new engine is Euro 5 compliant as well. So yeah, you're gonna see it in showrooms. Now, other bits of upgrades that are not really engine related. So it got the new 6-axis IMU electronics, which is great. I mean, hey, it's safer, so why not? And you're getting them for basically free. And you also have some updated Brembo brakes. Again, really good. These 890s never really had any issues with stopping power, but hey, better brakes, I can't complain, really. The price for this is announced at about 9,649 Great British pounds. Now, let me see exactly how much is this in US dollars. 9,649 US dollars, GBP to US dollars. I think it's about it's 13,000 US dollars. So the price is basically in line with what we had for the 790. It's not a bad price. It's definitely competitive with other brands. And yeah. Also, another cool thing, we're going to have an A2 restricted version available. So if you're from Europe and you can only have an A2 license, KTM will sell you a factory detuned version to 48 horsepower. So, hey, that's good. I mean, you can buy the bike, ride it around with 48 horsepower, and when you get your proper A license, you just de-restrict it, and voila, there you go. A brilliant 890. Now, what I want to mention in this category is that this space of this new age sort of middleweight bikes is getting really, really, really interesting. So we have the 890 Duke now, we have the Triumph Trident, we have the Tuono 660, and these are just bikes that launched like now. But we also have something from the Japanese, like the MT07 and MT09s. What I'm trying to say is that this space is really interesting. And remember like 10 years ago, or I guess even more, like 10 to 20 years ago, we had this battle in the 600cc department, right? So we had Yamaha with their R6, the CBR 600RR, we had the Gixxer 600. What am I missing? Triumph Daytonas, why not? So all of these 600cc super sports bikes. But those aren't really selling that well any longer. So I think this new war that we have over here is the midweight, the mid-range, I guess, naked bikes. That's exciting. Almost all of the important European guys are there. BMW is not yet. But yeah, we also have Yamaha, which is kind of the only Japanese player that's into this sort of exciting super nakeds. Can you call them super nakeds? I mean, the bigger ones are hyper nakeds, so there will be super nakeds, but CB1000R is also sort of a super naked. I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but yeah, I think this is gonna be really interesting, and I can't wait for a media outlet. I wish it was Crank It. Fortunately, it's probably not gonna be. I can't wait for a media outlet to take all of these bikes and put them properly head to head. That should be exciting. In slightly less exciting news, and not because the news itself is less exciting, because the bike is a bit less exciting. Harley Davidson announced their new Street Bob 114. So it basically has more engine in it, because that's how Americans do it. No, but in all seriousness though, it has about 100 extra cubic centimeters. It has about 7 horsepower more. Now up to 72 horsepower, which for a Harley cruiser, I would say it's not bad. It's not bad. Yeah, I agree. What is cool about this bike is basically a simple, bare bones, easily customizable softail. I can see this becoming the platform for a lot of mods. Like Harley will already offer a lot of mods, but the amount of customization that might go on with this bike is honestly going to be pretty amazing. And I can't wait to see what people get to do with it. We basically get an engine in a frame, and that's sort of about it. And from there on, you can let your imagination go, which is actually cool. Like if I were to have a Harley, customizing it would be a decently cool stuff to do. And Harley also slightly updated their other models in their range. Nothing really worthy of mentioning, I think. Now, if I missed something from Harley that was really important, make sure to leave a comment if you're listening to this on YouTube. If you're not, well, I'm sorry. Go to YouTube and leave a comment. But no, seriously, it is what it is. New Harleys. Hooray. And now finally, the last news topic of today is about a Chinese motorcycle company called CFMoto. They launched a new MT800. Now, CFMoto has been known for building decent quality bikes, vaguely based on KTMs, but they usually did sort of lower cc bikes. I think their biggest one was 650cc. But now they basically released the Chinese version of a KTM 790 Adventure. So I'm guessing because KTM launched the 890, they sort of got allowed to build this. But it's loosely based on the KTM 790 Adventure. We're going to have two versions, one street-oriented and another one more off-road oriented with like spoked wheels and cool stuff like that. Now, if you don't know about this company, so CFMoto builds decent quality bikes. It's a Chinese company that builds decent quality bikes and ATVs. They're not the best. They're not high-end. They're not Honda level. But neither are they Amazon-type bikes. Actually, if I'm going to have a test ride, or if I could somehow get my hands on one, I would be really curious to test at least their 650s that they had, because I heard a lot of good things about them. And hey, if it's a good bike, I'm willing to promote it for as many people as want to see my videos. So the engine itself delivers 94 horsepower, again derived from KTM's engine. I'm really curious about the price. I honestly do not know it yet at this point. But judging by how CFMoto used to price their things in the past, this is going to be damn competitive. And I don't mean competitive like almost sort of the lowest price. No, it's definitely going to be the lowest price out of most adventure bikes. I'm curious how lower, because in their 650 range, and I think they had a 390 or a 400 range, I think. But basically their 650s were really competitive on price. So I'm really curious to see how they do with this sort of bigger bike. Now, as with all these brands that are sort of not popular yet, one issue you might face is the dealer network and service expertise. Now, of course, they share a lot of items with other bikes, but still, CFMoto dealers, you can find them. They're just definitely not as sort of often found as Honda dealers or even KTM dealers. And service expertise, again, a bike is a bike at the end of the day, but finding sort of more specialized CFMoto guys, if you need something, I don't know, it's probably going to be a bit harder. But that being said, for the price you're probably going to pay for this, I would argue that's actually not bad, and that might be competitive. So yeah, this was the news section of this crankcast. It's actually a fairly long news section at about 25 minutes, and I don't think we've ever had such a long news section. But we're not going to ramble any longer, so let's jump into our story time. And the story time of today comes from Italy, from our beautiful Italy. We're going to talk about Ducati. Big surprise, I know, Italy, motorcycles, Ducati. Who would have guessed? My throat needed a bit of a juice break, but we're actually going to talk about the Ducati Monster. And we're going to talk about how did this bike came to be, and what is it? What was it? Why was it? I hope we're going to answer a lot of these questions in today's podcast. So first of all, how did the Monster come about? That's actually fairly interesting because the Monster initially, in 1992, it was a styling exercise. So the same way you see concept bikes these days, like online and renders and stuff like that, this was sort of what the Monster became. It was a styling exercise by Ducati's chief designer. And to be fair, it does have an iconic, proper naked look. Like if you think naked bike, you probably think Ducati Monster or something like that. The trellis frame, the exposed nature of the bike, the fact that you basically have almost no fairings. It's definitely an iconic design. The round headlight in the front, the twin exhaust at the back. It's a beautiful bike. But after it passed the sort of design concept stage, we have to be a bit more pragmatic, right? Like someone has to build it. So Ducati's technical director wanted something that screamed Ducati, right? So yes, this was going to be something different from Ducati, but they still wanted to go off their heritage, which makes a lot of sense. But they still wanted to keep sort of that classic Ducati heritage and I don't know, feel, I guess. But it had to be easy to ride. That was the first condition. And the second condition was that it actually can't be a sports bike. So yeah, at that point, Ducati was mainly really building sports bikes. And this was definitely going to be a change in their direction. Now here's the part that surprised me the most. Initially, the Ducati Monster wanted to be a cruiser. So Ducati actually wanted to go after Harley Davidson market with this bike. And they planned on it to be sort of a really customizable bike. So you have a lot of like hot roddy parts available, a lot of aftermarket and custom stuff to decorate your bike, to modify your bike. This is what the Monster was about to be. Luckily though, in my opinion, this didn't turn out to be that way because I think Cagiva tried to do something like that with a Ducati, and they kind of failed. So yeah, the Ducati Cruiser was not going to be. I mean, they would build the Diavol for 20 to 30 years later, but yeah, that's a bit of a different story now in it. But yeah, so they axed the whole hot rod cruiser option. They went back to naked bikes, and the Ducati Monster was a bit of a parts bin special. So a lot of the components were just taken from other bikes. So for example, I have some noted here. The original engine of the M900 Monster was from a Ducati 900 Supersport. The frame, the iconic exposed trellis frame, was actually a frame derived from their 851 Superbike. And the fork came from a Ducati 750 Supersport. These are all main components that were really good on other bikes, but they had to make them work together. And what turned out was a really tiny package and really well handling little bike that was the Ducati Monster. Now, yes, I said this was a parts being special, but in this case, in Ducati's case, this was not bad at all, because the parts were pretty high-end stuff. Like, for example, the engine from a 900 Supersport. Yes, it's a parts being special. No, it's not a bad engine at all. The same goes with the fork and with the frame derived from their other models, because Ducati made high-end stuff, and they still do make high-end stuff. And so even their leftover parts would still be quite high-end. And for example, this is why my bike, which my second bike ever, was a Ducati Monster 600. And that bike, which is fairly cheap, and it was the entry-level Monster, almost, at 600, that bike had Brembo brakes, front and rear. For a parts being bike, I don't know about you, but that sounds good to me. There were multiple of these version from the first gen of Monsters released. Initially came the 900, then they also brought out a 750, a 600, and then in limited sort of production and limited countries, they came with a 400 version. It was more for some parts of Europe and Japan. But yeah, the Monster at this point was born. One of the iconic things about it, other than the frame and the design, was the engine, because it was a simple air-cooled air-twin design. It has some issues, like for example, you had to change the camshaft belt every about 10,000 kilometers, but the engine was good. And not only that it was good, the sound of it was fairly iconic, right? Like for something that wanted to be a simple bike, it gave a lot of emotion, right? It vibrated a bit, but the sound was really iconic, and the looks of it was iconic. The completely exposed engine that had no frame underneath was something that you didn't see every day on the street. And to be fair, even today, there are some bikes that don't look as good as the initial Monster, as the original Monster. Now, unfortunately, I kept talking about this sort of iconic design and look, but this one was killed in 2020. So currently, Ducati announced their latest sort of mid-level Monster, not their flagship 1200, but the smaller one. And unfortunately, the trellis frame is no more. They gave up on it, unfortunately. I mean, to be fair, the bike started with a trellis frame, and then they started to only incorporate part of the bikes as being trellis frame. So there were sort of hybrids between trellis and other materials like aluminium. But now, finally, the trellis frame is over. Unfortunately, I mean, the current Monster sort of lost a bit of its heritage, of its classic looks. But hey, we'll see how it goes. Now, this was a really happy ending for Ducati, because Ducati, they were known to have some financial issues. When you only build dedicated sports bike and hardcore stuff, expensive stuff, my neighbor is doing stuff upstairs. Oh well, but when you build such stuff, it's kind of hard to make money out of it. But the Monster was Ducati's best-selling model of all times, the best-selling range at least. It sold in huge amounts, and for Ducati, that was a lifesaver. Now, if I read correctly, I think 70% or something like that of Ducati sales were actually having Monsters. That's amazing, right? For a bike that's so rudimentary, the fact that it became so iconic and so sought after, it says a lot, man. It says a lot about how good this bike actually turned out to be. It's an awesome motorcycle. And also what I found is a great beginner bike, because let me tell you a bit about my bike. So my second ever bike, which I kind of considered my first because my first one was a disaster, but yeah. My second ever bike was a Ducati Monster 600. It was a 2001 model, so it was still one of the last of the first generations. It had the proper iconic frame. It had the proper round headlight, yada yada, all of that stuff. It was such an amazing bike. The components were really good on it. I think it had Marzocchi forks. The Brembo brakes stopped really well, especially for a bike that used to be sort of entry-level in 2001. But entry-level Ducati, yeah, it's better than entry-level Honda, that's for sure. In terms of components, at least, and their quality. And performance, mostly performance. It was a really reliable bike because the design of the engine was so simple. Air-cooled L-twin. easy, didn't overheat ever. It produced almost 64, no, I think it did like 54 horsepower, 58 horsepower, I don't remember exactly. But it produced somewhere around that power range, really good power range. It had proper acceleration for such a bike, of course. And the sound it made for a small bike was pretty nice, like that classic Ducati sound. Yeah, it was a really nice bike. I have a lot of memories of that bike, and one of my goals is, I mean, not really a goal, but I do want one day to get it back. Not necessarily mine, but another monster from the generation, maybe the 600 or the 900, I don't know. But I do want another monster in my life. That bike was really, really, really good. Now, just because the Monster started as this sort of more budget parts bin special, doesn't mean it always stayed like that. There were some exceptions and some special editions. And one of the most notable and unique ones was the Ducati Monster S4R. Now, this bike had an engine derived from one of their super bikes, and what this meant is that it produced around 140 to 150 horsepower. For a Monster, that's not bad. Again, classic L-twin. I think this one was oil-cooled, if I remember correctly. But it's a bike with all top-of-the-shelf components, good power, no electronics. It's a Monster, as it's in the name, and again, it's one of those bikes that I need to have at one point in my life. It's a bit rare. You don't see it everywhere. It's actually not that easy to find, but when you find it, and if you find the Monster S4R, please let me know, because I might be interested in buying one. But yeah, this was the Ducati Monster. This is how it came about. First it was a styling design, then Ducati needed to make money, so they went into their parts bin, found some really cool components, put it together with that original design, and wow, what a bike and what a lineage did that bike create for Ducati. That was it. That was story time. I could probably talk about monsters for a lot longer, but we're already quite deep into this episode. So yeah, I need to thank you all for listening. So I'm not sure where you're listening at this point, but you can find this podcast on YouTube and also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your podcasting platform of choice is, even on Anchor. Now, also make sure to follow our main channel, Let's Crank It. I just released a new video on what exactly is a supermoto. It's really fun and informative, of course. I plan on releasing videos every 2 to 3 weeks over on that channel. That's the main one with the more sort of cinematic films. And yeah, this was Tudor, your host, and I'm really thankful that you came here. Please leave a 5-star review if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, for example. And talk to you next week with hopefully even more news and even more exciting stuff from this marvelous motorcycling world. Thanks a lot for listening to this, and see you next time.